Is there anyone there listening? Welcome to the third meetup of the product engineers community. And so today we have a special guest. Els is a product manager, interim or fractional product lead. That's how she likes to be called. And as product engineers, we really take pride into understanding the business because we believe that can help us making better technical decisions and also eventually even contribute to the product success. So that's why it's very important to understand who is our customer. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today with Els, about the concept of ideal customer profile. So yeah, take a seat and enjoy. Hi Els, the
Hi,
stage is yours.
thank you. Yes, great to speak here today. As I posted on LinkedIn today, I like product engineers very much. I love it when people don't stay in their lane and kind of cross into different verticals of the business. I think it's very important. So, very happy to speak here today. As Pepe mentioned, ideal customer profile, it is basically my favorite topic in the world. I'm just going to start sharing my screen because I believe it should be at the heart of everything we do, basically. I think it's the number one question that needs to be answered in order to be able to build any good product and therefore a successful business. And it's so often overlooked. So let's dive in, shall we? That's me. So I'll start with introducing myself. Peppa already did it quite quickly. My background is, so I've been in tech and actually in startups and scale ups for 15 years and 8 of those in product. I am currently a solopreneur, which means that I work with a variety of clients, all of which B2B SaaS clients, or most of which B2B SaaS clients, startups, as an interim product lead or also as a product advisor and coach. So I like to get my hands dirty and actually do the work. And I also coach VPs of product, CPOs, more senior product managers, and I advise also people on the C level. The two are slightly different. I mentioned B2B SaaS startups. The content for today. Firstly, I'm going to dive in a little bit into the main question, why this question is so important, right? Why should we keep asking who's it for? Why do we care so much about the topic of ICP? Secondly, how do we diagnose whether we have an ICP problem? And last but not least, how can we fix it? Because without that, it would be a sad episode. Diving in, why the ideal customer profile comes first. But before I do that, maybe some of you are asking, okay, you've said this ideal customer profile, you've said ICP, but what is that? This is a definition that I think is helpful, which says, so it describes an ideal customer for a business based on common attributes like, but not limited to, demographics, behavior patterns, needs, and pain points. So it's basically a description of who you want to serve, who you want to build for, who you want to message to, who you want to sell to. So an answer to the question, who's it for? So I mentioned already, I come primarily from startups and scale-ups, which means that I've seen a lot of failure and a lot of companies dying. I try to tell myself that's not because of me. It doesn't reflect poorly on me necessarily. It's just kind of the reality of what it's like to work at startups. So these are some statistics that are quite widely known. Basically, message here, most startups die at some point. The main reason for that being that their product doesn't solve a market need. So I've been at a lot of companies, some of which failed, some of which did okay. So some of them are still around. So I've experienced hypergrowth once, but about 5 of the companies I've worked for in the past 15 years did not make it, right? So I spent a lot of time thinking, what is now the difference between the startups that failed and the ones that didn't? Because if I could crack that code, that would be amazing, obviously, right? Then I could be extremely valuable to any company and maybe make a lot of money. Would be great. So I spent a lot of time obviously thinking about this. And my thinking went a bit like this. Number one, I was thinking it has a bit to do with competitive differentiation. For the companies that did very well, it was quite easy for us to explain why customers should pick us and not somebody else, why we were better. And at the companies where we didn't survive, we struggled with this, and we secretly whispered to each other, they should probably pick the competitor. Or when they picked us, we were like, they probably didn't hear of our competitor. We got lucky there, right? That's not a great feeling. So competitive differentiation is number one. But what is that, right? How do you do that, and what is that made up of if you unpack it? And I think it has a lot to do with having a crisp core value that is stronger than your competitor's core value, right? It needs to be something that people can wrap their heads around quite quickly, that just lands. But I kind of hate the word value. I use the word value a lot, everybody does, but the word value kind of sucks because it's very fluffy and it means nothing per se. It is subjective. It is in the eye of the beholder, which leads to the question, who is it for? If we don't understand who's it for, we do not know what we're talking about when we're talking about user goals, user success, value. All of these things mean nothing if we do not know who's it for, which goes back into competitive differentiation. So conquering niche by niche. So a lot of people ask me when I talk about, okay, let's focus on one ICP first. Let's go for a niche ICP first. Like, oh, but we won't get to the market size that we need, right? We need a 1 billion evaluation to raise VC funds, or is it even worth being in business for a niche or for just one ICP? Well, the idea is that you will conquer them niche by niche. And it's a very common strategy. Airbnb did it, for example. Their first niche was attendees of sold-out conferences in major cities. They first rented out their own mattresses, right? Slack did it. Slack actually started as an internal tool for a gaming company and then became a communication tool just for software developers. Pinterest did it. It was first focused on women interested in fashion, home decor, crafting, and recipes. I think they even went for some bitches and stitches group, some weird, very small niche. So a lot of these success stories started with one niche and then kind of expanded from there. It's definitely not a foreign idea. And I like this idea of the bowling pin strategy. So your first ICP is your first bowling pin, but once you've knocked that over, solidly, firmly knocked it over, it's on the ground, you can knock over adjacent bowling pins. So you can kind of branch out to targeting adjacent ICPs. I'm going to jump into some theory. I'm going to talk about Tony Ulwick's Jobs to be Done Growth Strategy Matrix. I really like Tony Ulwick's work. If you're interested in product, which you are, I bet you've heard about Jobs to be Done. And Tony Ulwick's work, Outcome-Driven Innovation, is a predecessor of Jobs to be Done. Definitely Google him if you don't know of him. So he basically said, when you launch something new, be it a new business, be it a new product, or be it an existing product in a new market, you have two choices. The first choice is whether you're going to get the job done better or you're going to get the job done worse. And then the other choice is, are you going to charge more or are you going to charge less? And when you look at these options, you can draw a matrix. And if we start at the top right, you can decide to say, we're going to get the job done better and we're going to charge less. So we're going to build something that is more powerful, more impressive, more feature rich, more capable than the market leader right now, and it's going to be less expensive. This is a dominant strategy, and you're trying to take the same customers that are already with the market leader and trying to convince them to move to you instead. I think you can imagine that that's a tough one, especially when you have finite runway and your pockets get empty at some point, right? It's not so easy to target the market leader head on and say, I'm going to build something that's better than what you have and it's going to be cheaper. The second option is a disruptive strategy, and we've all heard the word disruption quite a lot. But really a disruptive strategy in this sense means you choose to get the job done worse and you charge less. And now worse might sound bad, but it doesn't have to be. I think a very good example for this is Photoshop versus Canva. If you look at Photoshop, Photoshop is extremely powerful. It has a lot of features. It can do really impressive stuff. And it's great for somebody who knows very well how to work with it, right? Like a good designer, they can work with it. But for a lot of people, like myself, that's way too much, right? We don't need all of those features. We don't need that much complexity. We're overserved. So a player like Canva came in and saw that and said, we're going to build something that's objectively worse, right? Because it's a lot less powerful and we can charge a lot less for it. And we're going to target these overserved customers or the non-customers. People like me, I wasn't using Photoshop at all because I was totally intimidated. And then Canva came in the market. Then we have the discrete strategy where you get the job done worse and you charge more. How, you ask? Well, if your customers don't have another choice. A good example is if you're at the airport and you've crossed the security check, then they can charge €5 for a bottle of water because you're stuck there. So this works in very few circumstances. And now we get to my favorite growth strategy, which is a differentiated growth strategy, where you choose to get the job done better and charge more for underserved customers. So what you're going to do is you are looking at, well, basically everything is a red ocean because it's 2025. There's basically software for everything, right? But you look at a space that's already covered. But in that red ocean, you're going to identify a smaller blue pond. So you're going to find like a smaller niche of people that have a solution that kind of works for them because it kind of works for everybody. But you're going to really focus on this niche group and try to deeply understand their specific pain points and their unmet needs and build a solution specifically for it. So architects, they already have. They can use Salesforce, they can use Monday.com, right? There's all of this general project management software that they could use. But you could say, I'm going to build the CRM or the project management tool just for architects because I'm going to spend a lot of time understanding their needs. That's a differentiated growth strategy. I've worked with a lot of companies who play there. And I quite like that because it allows me to build a better product for a specific someone. Then very important, you can also get stuck in the middle. And for me, understanding this was a big unlock because it also helped me understand why so many businesses I've worked with, for, and at have failed. Because we were launching something new and we were slightly cheaper or slightly better at something, but not a lot cheaper or a lot better, like 10x, right? So the difference needs to be really stark in one of these dimensions because you're asking people to change a habit. You're asking people to switch away from something that they are familiar with, that they know very well, towards something that is completely unfamiliar and new. And that's a large hurdle. So they will only do that if it is really a lot better or a lot cheaper. A little bit will not suffice. You can do this if you are the incumbent and you just have to retain people. That's okay. But it does not work if you're trying to pull people over to you. So a bit of theory there. So I like the differentiated growth strategy because I want to build a better product for a specific someone. And that specific someone is the ideal customer profile, ICP. I want to tell you a bit of an embarrassing story, or it doesn't reflect well on me, but I have gotten stuck building one-stop shops more than once. I don't know, Pepe, have you ever built a one-stop shop?
Not really. What's
Okay,
that?
that's lucky you. So maybe you have, I'll explain it. It's the value prop here is saying, okay, people use a lot of different tools for a lot of different things that they need to do, and that requires them to switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to build one big tool that allows them to do all of these things. So you might have a tool that is really good at making offers and another tool that's really good at making invoices and another tool that's really good at this. And we're going to do like a big tool that does all of it. And the value prop is there is that people don't have to switch anymore. I've tried this many times, believing in this value prop, going like, okay, yeah, and failing miserably. Because in the end, we built a mediocre copy of what was already in the market for every single one of these use cases. So we ended up being everybody's meh and nobody's wow. In 2019, I built a product that was a little bit like this. Um, I don't know if you can read this website, but to me, this is utterly depressing. So we built a data platform. We pivoted a lot, basically a bit on the whim of the CEO, it felt. There was a lot of applause for being able to make decisions really fast, right? Rapid decision making, and it was kind of random. So we jumped from one thing to another. It was very reactive. It was very much, went to a conference and they told us that a CDP, a customer data platform, is the future. So we'll now be building a customer data platform. Went a bit like this. And so what happened was we followed very reactive product management. Whenever we got some intel that sounded legit, we kind of jumped on it. But we talked to a variety of people. We talked to experts in the field who were not actually customers, but experts. We talked to potential enterprise customers. We talked to potential startup customers. We talked to economic buyers. We talked to decision makers. We talked to end users. And everybody told us different things. And whenever we heard something we considered interesting, we tried to integrate it into the product and into the landing page. And we ended up with a product and landing page like this. So you can tell here it's super vague, right? It lists something about we're going to streamline processes across various departments. Okay, which departments? We're going to have, there's measurable return on investments. Okay, that's a little piece that we wrote for the decision maker. But we also talk about optimized data cohesion, and that kind of targets the end user, different persona. And generally, what does it do? Totally unclear. And the problem is we couldn't explain what it does anymore because we had no idea what to put above the fold. Because the messaging got so bloated, so all over the place, we did not know what would resonate because we didn't really know who we were talking to anymore. So I've been in this situation more than once. And I think a lot of people have been in a similar spot. Pepe, now that I've explained it more, does it resonate?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Painful. Now you might be thinking, when I talked about focusing on one ICP, focusing on a niche, but what about all those successful companies that served everyone from day one? Because they exist. Yes, they do. It's rare. They exist, but it's very rare, right? It's a bit of a mix of just a lucky shot or right time, right place, right? Really excellent timing and having a truly transformative offering, right? It has happened, I guess. It's very rare. One of the examples that people mention is the iPhone that everybody just loved. And it was totally transformative and amazing. But if you're in a company like a startup, a scale up, or just any company, usually your resources are finite, right? It does run out at some point. So you want to increase your odds of finding product market fit. And if you create that focus, right? If you limit the playing field, obviously, rationally, the odds of achieving product market fit are much higher. So there are far more cases of companies becoming successful following such a niche or like one ICP at a time approach versus the ones that like came out of the gate surfing everyone. And last but not least, there's an illusion of instant ubiquity. Ubiquity, that's a hard word to say. So for me, my mind was a bit blown when ChatGPT came out. And I thought, okay, does this now shoot my whole theory like to pieces? Is it all wrong? Because it came out and it seemed to be amazing for everyone. Right? It was like there's no vertical approach here. Anyone can use it and just excellent for anyone. And it's like, okay, am I wrong? And it wasn't, because actually before they launched publicly, first they launched already in June 2018 with GPT-1, which was really focused. Their only audience was very small, just AI practitioners. And then GPT-2 and 3, so 2 came out in November 2019 and then 3 in May 2020, it was still researchers. And then GPT-3 API came out in later. I didn't write down it later. And it was focused on developers who wanted to build upon it. And then finally in November 2022 came the public launch. So all of this had happened before. And in between, there's a lot of small beta launches in smaller groups to perfect the model and the product for these groups, right? And get feedback. So it looked like it came out of the gate. It was perfect for everyone, but it wasn't. There was like a whole thing that happened under the hood that I didn't see. Same with the iPhone, actually. I just mentioned the iPhone as one of these ones that just was instantly for everybody, often mentioned as such. But actually, the first iPhone was very expensive and locked you into a 2-year contract. Why is that? Because of their ICP. They were looking for early adopters who really wanted this, right? There's a reason behind that strategy. And last on this topic, the ICP is the company's shared problem and not just marketing's issue. I always come into companies, I see a lot of companies as a solopreneur. I pretty quickly start talking about ICPs because I pretty quickly find out that there's something missing there. And I often get the response like, oh yeah, marketing has some personas lying around. We have an ICP. It's there. There's a folder with like a bunch of slides with personas. I'm like, okay, nice. Okay, so the product is for Mary, who's a head of data, and she's 29 and she's single. Okay, so that's in one folder. And then I open the Jira tickets and they go like this. As a user. Great, okay. So something went wrong, right? We have this marketing persona tucked away in a folder, and then we have Jira tickets that, yeah, are not very useful anymore. So what we need a company-wide understanding of our number one customer, ideal customer profile, company-wide shared understanding, and we need to define it in a way that makes sense. To be honest, whenever I see these personas, I get very frustrated because it's full of fluff, because people like to give them identifiers that make us feel like we know them, but we're just making a lot of crap up in the end. And the people who are reading these personas, they cannot distinguish between what is based on actual research and what you made up to make it cute. So I'm not a fan of these at all. I'm also not a fan of adding a random age because demographics tend to be wrong. I think what is important when we talk about ICPs, we should talk about the most unique and important characteristics about that ICP and no fluff around it. Then we can use it. So number 2, before I move on, Pepper, any question?
Yeah, let's take a small break to see if anyone has any questions so far. I'll just go through the comments. So Louise wrote, Jack of all trades, master of none. So I think it was related to the example for one-stop shop. And then Hugo wrote, and this is a question actually. And was switching the key problem for those users? Or switching tools. So was switching tools the key problem for those users?
So they think it is. Often they talk about it being a problem, but it's not. Sorry, did I interrupt?
No.
Yeah. So often they mention, or maybe you ask them, like, would it be better if it's all under one roof? And they'll go, yeah, I guess. Yeah, why not? Or they will say that they would like it to be all under one roof. But in reality, even if you have the option to pick between one standalone tool that solves one particular use case very well, or one big tool that solves everything but poorly or like slightly less good, you will likely pick the standalone tools anyway, right? It sounds appealing, but it doesn't weigh up against having just the best in class for every individual thing. And this is something that you'll see over and over.
Right. So Hugo asks related to this. So for example, what would not be fluff in that persona example?
So for me, so later in this thing, I will talk about the attributes. This is also part of defining an ICP. So I'll actually get into that a bit later. Let me get through that part, and then I will ask again Hugo if that answers it or not.
Okay. And then there's one last question from Viami. So why abstract to an ICP? Why not simply build for a paying customer?
Yeah, Fair, fair. You could do that. I am very nervous about reactive product management, where we basically take what a customer tells us at face value, and when they say jump, we ask how high, right? That's like an extreme, but we just implement what customers ask us, and we go where the money is. Um, it is a strategy. The concern there is that you end up acting like a software development agency for them or a consulting agency for them. So they have you build their custom software that fits their specific case perfectly. But I would prefer to have, well, if you're building something completely new, right, and there's just one customer, it would be great if you can have 3 or 5 that fit the same ICP, so you can just quickly check whether this is something that's common for that ICP or whether it's really special for that one customer, because you risk becoming their software development agency and building just a single tool that works for them. And then you can have another customer and you do the same, and you have another customer and you do the same. And you end up with this beast of a product that is extremely modular, because customer A does not want to see what customer B sees, and customer B does not want to see what customer C sees. They all have their own thing, and it just grows in complexity. So a lot of B2B SaaS companies, they work in this pilot project kind of way, which is in a sense good because you have signal, people are willing to pay. But at some point, it will break you up, which is it's okay to go like that for a while, but at some point you need to switch it. So often I'm brought into companies when they're a bit bigger, when they have maybe 50, 60 customers in their customer base, and this whole thing becomes too unruly, having all of these slightly different versions of the product for all of these slightly different ICPs. I hope that answers the question.
There are no more questions for now, but yeah, we can get back to it later. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me as well, Pepe, if something comes up. I like being interrupted. That's always good for me.
Sure.
All right, so we talked a lot about why I believe it is so important to think about your ICP first. And now, how can you diagnose whether you have an ICP problem? So I think there are some symptoms that kind of point at this root cause. And the first one is I'll go in, I'll see the product roadmap, and it's just cluttered with kind of random looking features that often come because they're a request from a prospect or from a customer. And when I look at this list, I don't see a red thread at all. So it's relatively common, even if you have a good product strategy, that there are some weird requests coming in, right? That it's not a perfect thing that everything points in the direction of the strategy. But I do hope to see some red thread, right? That it's not just jumping from one thing to another. And often I notice this. Second one, will have, in case it's more like a marketing driven company, we'll see poor marketing qualified lead, MQL, conversion rates. We'll see a lot of leads coming in through marketing, and they do not convert into paying customers. Why is that? Because marketing is just messaging to whoever, right? Or like maybe to anyone, kind of spray and pray, or they're messaging to an ICP that they think is the right ICP. But then when these people come into the product, they're deeply disappointed because the product wasn't for them, right? It's not tailored to them. So the promise, it doesn't live up to the promise. And if you have a PLG motion, a product-led growth motion, where you have maybe a free trial or a free version, and you're hoping that free users will convert to paid users, they won't, because they came in, they were disappointed. And if you have a sales-led organization where you first sign a contract and then you get people through the door, you will see high churn. Same thing. And lastly, you will see poor sales conversion rates. Why? Because sales struggles. Like, they don't have any nice message that they can tell, right? Like, it's all over the place, as we saw on this one-stop shop website. It's that, but then in a conversation. So I've seen all of those many times, and we tried slapping a band-aid on, right? Like putting more money to paid marketing, or just trying a different campaign, or building that one extra feature that's going to save it all. And it never worked. We need to make sure that marketing is messaging to the same people that product is building for. We need sales to be selling to the same people that product is building for. So now a show of hands. Is that possible? Can people say something? Can I get like thumbs up, or is there any way, maybe in the chat, people can tell us if something resonates?
Yeah, in the chat, yeah.
Cool, okay.
People can write in the chat for sure.
So please tell me in the chat, who feels confident that the leadership team of their company is fully aligned on the number one ICP?
No answers.
No answers. Oh, maybe.
You can take it as a no.
So what I see, so I've done this, a similar talk in a few live events, and almost all the time, almost everybody did not raise their hand, right? So it's very common for that alignment to be missing. And this is also something I see when I enter companies, and it's not misalignment on like small detail, but really on core stuff, like who this thing is for. So it's very common. Now let's solve the problem, right? So maybe you have come away from this so far and thought like, okay, shit, we have a problem, right? So what can you do? I'm going to walk you through a workshop that I give. So I give these paid workshops that span multiple weeks, or so it's kind of like a workshop, and then it's like a process that comes out of it, mainly with Series A, Series B companies that have like slightly larger customer bases. And I'm just going to walk you through the exact steps that I take, so that if you like, you can steal it and you can try to make that happen at your company. Or you can write me, but you don't have to. You can try to do it. So step one is I work with the team to compile a long list of potential ICPs. And I work on describing the ICP, so that we will get to you, Hugo, very soon. So often I can do that through conversations, because sales has an idea of who they are serving, marketing has an idea who they are serving, they have their personas lying around, product has an idea, tech has an idea, the CEO has an idea, everybody has an idea. So quickly you can get a long list of ICPs. I also look in the existing customer base. I'll tell you more about that in a sec. So I have now this long list of ICPs, and I've described these ICPs, so that I've described who are they, what pain are they struggling with, how do we solve that for them specifically. And then async, not in a group, I will have the leadership team rank these potential ICPs based on important factors, which I will show you after which factors those are. And then in step 3, I will bring them together and we will have a discussion about it. I always like people to work async first, not in a group, so that we really get people's real thinking instead of something that's kind of pressured out of them. And the outcome is a first stab at alignment on the number one ICP. This is an ongoing process. It's actually forever ongoing, right? Because you'll constantly iterate on it, you'll change things, but that's a first start. So how do you compile a long list of ICPs? What I usually do, I go through the current customer base to check who have we successfully sold to before. So I will usually put this in, I'll make a new file. So I often don't do this in the CRM, but I'll put it, for example, in Airtable. I quite like Airtable or any of these kind of files, because I'll make column headers for all of the attributes that I think could be important. So I could have maybe company size, geography, but also what tech stack they're using, which persona brought the tool into the company, what value proposition made it click for them, anything else that I think is a relevant attribute when I describe them. So I make all of those column headers, and I kind of start pulling in all of that data for all of our customers. And then I'll do an analysis, right? So for example, I also check who is bringing in the most revenue for us. So then I'll do an analysis, say, okay, now let's look at the companies that are bringing in the most revenue. Who are they? So that kind of looks like this. It's an example Airtable. And then secondly, sometimes the customers we have are not the customers we want, right? Maybe we actually want to serve a completely different ICP. So I also do one-on-ones with the leadership team to figure out what is that aspirational ICP, where do they really want to go. So I put that together. And then, Hugo, finally, how do you describe your potential ICPs? So I already mentioned it has to be a combination of unique and important characteristics of your potential ideal customers. What are those? So I often fall back on this work by Lenny Rachitsky, who is a pretty important figure in the product space. Lenny does a lot of, so he gives away a lot of very well researched stuff where he interviews or dives deeply into how very successful tech companies are working. And he looked at a large group of very successful tech companies, and he asked how they described their ICPs in the early days. And he found out that all of them used 3 attributes out of this list of 9. So there's these 9 attributes. Can you see this easily? Or shall I read them out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Perfect.
they're clear, yeah.
Good. Okay, so there's these 9. What is important is that it's more than just company size and geolocation. Often when I step into B2B SaaS companies, they define their ICP with that. You know, it's like the head of data at a 50 to 250 FTE company in Germany, and that's the ICP. It's often described like that. You can do it like that, but are those really the most important and unique attributes? Maybe not. Hugo, does this help? I can continue, and then Hugo can let us know later.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
very
see.
curious. So here's an example of that filled in, right? So this, for example, Linear, their initial ICP was to serve 2 to 5% startups using GitHub and Google Auth at a founder-driven product company. So that's a very nice ICP. Figma, mid-stage software company with in-house designers that place a premium on design. I always like ICPs that revolve around a common pain point, for example. Now, step 2. Let's say we have now identified our long list of ICPs, and now we need to figure out which one to choose, right? How do we rank them? And now I'm going to dive into these factors that I think are important. Number 1 is how easy are they to reach and acquire? How easy are they to retain and upsell? What's their value? You can measure that in annual contract value, lifetime value, CAC payback period, however you want. And what does the competitive space look like for us? And you'll see that 1 and 3, they kind of even each other out. If you want to target startups, they will be much easier for you to reach and acquire, but their value will likely be lower. And if you're going more upmarket, you target enterprise, they will be very hard to reach and acquire, but the value will be higher. And of course, the competitive space, it's totally different depending on your ICP. If you are targeting startups, you're likely going up against Google Sheets. But if you're targeting an enterprise, you're going up against Salesforce, right? They're just considering different alternatives. And you can also tell that a company does not know their number 1 ICP because they will have like this crazy list of competitors or alternatives because they don't know how to differentiate between which ones are actually a threat to them and which aren't, because it depends on who you're serving. And last but not least, the most important factor is, do they have a compelling reason to buy? Do they have a strong, unsolved recurring pain? Go for the ICP that has the most excruciating pain. So I count that one twice. And then step 3, bring it all together, right? So I have people do this async. So I'll have like a Google Sheet for each one. Like it will have rows for all of the ICPs, and the column headers will be these factors. And I will make one for everybody who I want to participate, maybe every member of the leadership team. Everyone gets their own version and works in that, and then I'll bring it together in a workshop. And it's not like the ICP with the highest score just wins. It's just a starting point to have a conversation that actually makes sense. I was going to do a case study, but I don't think we have so much time. So I'm just going to go through that. Quick question, can we never have more than 1 ICP? Yes, we can, right? I already mentioned we have this bowling pin strategy, but don't be too quick. You can do it when you have product market fit in your number 1 ICP. There's so many definitions of product market fit out there. I like this one. It means that you could repeatedly sell your standardized product. If you're still making customizations for every sale, you don't have product market fit, and it's likely too soon to add a new ICP. You will dilute your focus. Can you never change your ICP? Yes, you can, and you should. Right? Just because you wrote it down in your knowledge base does not mean it's now fixed at all. Like it's an ongoing conversation. So this is my only takeaway. Alignment on your ICP is must have to build a better product. And I hope I've convinced you guys why this is important, and I've given you some tools on how to get to work with this. The end.
Nice. Thank you very much, Els. I'm sure it's been very useful for house engineer listening to what the ICP is and how important it is to be aligned on it. So yeah, I think let's see if anyone has any questions. Hugo replied, and he said that he kind of agrees.
Oh.
And yeah, so that's it.
Kind of agrees.
All good.
Now I'm curious.
Kind of.
Connect with me on LinkedIn, Hugo. I'd love to continue.
Yeah. Viame wrote, the best possible setup is that the ICP is you, most of all for the development tools, that's quite easy. It's a bit easier for us probably.
It's good and it's a risk. Like I'm actually building a development tool right now with one of my clients, and it's very good because you have access and you can use it, right? You can easily dog food it. And you'll have access to your own network, but also risky because you might equate your own things to what your target audience believes, and you might be wrong.
Anyone else? Questions? I have some questions actually. Yeah, so I'm very curious. So when you spoke about reactive product management, what are the main consequences for the company in terms like on a operational level when it's reactive?
So many. So I think firstly you will end up likely with a very bloated product that doesn't make sense per se. So what happens with this reactive product management, where whenever you get feedback you just implement it, you'll build a lot of features that don't actually serve your ICP and don't actually help you achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve. So I see this very often. I'll come into companies where they say, oh, we're very good at listening to the customer, and there's like a long backlog of features and just a lot of stuff that has been done. Another thing I work on a lot is helping teams adopt outcome-driven ways of working. So I help also the leadership team first figure out what are the outcomes, what are the goals that we should be going after. Is it user growth? Is it revenue growth? Is it market leadership? What is it? And then from there, we think about what is the product metric, the main product metric that we should be driving. A big problem that a lot of teams have is that they're driving way too many things, right? The goals are very diffuse, and therefore you might as well not have any at all. So I work very hard on helping teams have one. And once you have one product metric that you should be driving, because that's the product metric that shows that your customers are getting value out of the product. Once you have that, you can start not just reacting to everything that comes in, but thinking, okay, this request, is it actually going to drive that outcome, or is it just something that people just kind of randomly wanted? But it's not really going to change anything really big in the life of the customer and not for us as a business. Do they fit our ICP? When they ask for something, what is the pain point underneath it, or what is the opportunity underneath it that they're really trying to solve? If you don't do that, you will end up building a lot of little features that were requested that don't actually move the needle. And the thing will get heavier, heavier, and heavier. It's hard to maintain. The messaging will get very diffuse. All of the issues that we discussed earlier.
Okay. So, in other words, if I get it correctly, if we are misaligned on the ICP, we are more at risk of becoming like a feature factory.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Even if you are aligned on the ICP, you can still become a feature factory, right? Because then you can say, okay, this is our number one ICP, and whenever they ask for something, we do it, which still is not the right approach, right? I would still check how important is that thing really, and is it likely to drive our outcome? And really, what is that thing? Like, do we really understand the underlying pain point, opportunity, whatever, or are we just doing whatever we were asked? You can still make those mistakes even if you know your number one ICP. But if you don't know your number one ICP, it's even worse, right? Because you're doing this for a very diverse set of customers who likely some of them are never going to be happy within your product. It's very hard,
Thanks.
by the way, for dev tooling. I don't know how many of you guys are working on dev tools. I am, and developers are more privacy sensitive, so we don't have a sign up. So we don't have any information on who our users are, which is very interesting for me in product management. I could do a whole different talk. For me, somebody who cares a lot about my ICP, that's very difficult.
Hugo came back to you and he wrote that, yeah, so, okay, the kind that was about having alignment in the company. So the question you asked before. So he says, we have some alignment, but then a customer comes with money on hand and then immediate revenue beats ideal product strategy. So the ability to say no is hard when financial targets drives
Yeah.
sales, for
Yeah.
example.
This is extremely common. And there's something to be said for both, right? Like, yes, you need to keep the lights on. So if there's a good enough price tag, it's really hard to say no, and maybe you shouldn't say no. On the other hand, I've been at the other side of the spectrum several times where we followed the money, right? And in the end, it killed us because the product made no sense. It was not cohesive. And it was very hard for us, / impossible to come back from.
Right. Yeah, I'm wondering how, like, us being engineers here, how this affects our engineering work when we have this kind of reactive product management. Yeah, from what you're saying, it seems like that could be one of the main causes, for example, of technical debt or bad technical choices, because we just have to create this monster to satisfy different kind of customers. So even us eventually start to struggle to understand what we're dealing with, right?
Yes. I think it's also very hard for you to do your best work if you don't know the strategy, right? Because that's missing in this reactive product management. It's just kind of all over the map. And I can imagine that if you're the one actually writing the code and spending so much time on it, that must be quite frustrating. But
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yeah, Luis. So how much is the exponential growth at all cost mentality in our industry responsible for this?
so yeah, it's a very hard question to answer. I think there are a lot of issues with that exponential growth at all cost mentality. So many, can't even begin to talk about that. And yes, I think I see it very much in relation to companies that want to raise VC funds,
Cool.
which I think is kind of related. I think because whenever you want to raise money from VCs, it comes with this idea of having this kind of hockey stick exponential growth. And they are always demanding you need to have like 1 billion revenue, right? Which leads to companies thinking of, I need a big market, cannot be niche. And I always put in a lot of work at making people understand that you can target a big market in the end and still go niche by niche. So I definitely see the relationship. I don't know if there's causation in that sense, that it is because of this mindset. But I imagine it surely doesn't help.
Okay. Seems like there are no more questions. So yeah, I guess we can wrap it up.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
very
Thank you
much,
for having me.
Hels. It was great. I'm sure it's been helpful for the community, and of course it's gonna be recorded so other people can see it later. And yeah, where can people find you if they want to
I
send you a
just
message or
got rid
anything?
of the thing. Let me do the thing. Can you see? Ta-da. There.
Okay.
So
It,
you can
it
find
was
me on
there all along.
LinkedIn. Exactly. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm try to be quite responsive there. And I also write a blog on Substack that you can read, obviously.
All right. Thank you very much, Els. Thank you very much for whoever's been watching so far. Yeah, and to the next meetup.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Speak soon.
Bye-bye.